Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan. Quebec Premier François Legault is dropping plans to impose a tax on unvaccinated adults. He says the measure would have divided Quebecers and that it's important for them to stay united. About 10% of the province's eligible population are not vaccinated against COVID-19. Premier Legault also announced that gyms and spas will be allowed to reopen on February 14th. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he plans to move forward with a phased-in reopening plan, despite a warning that COVID-19 cases, hospitalizations, and intensive care admissions will likely increase. Statistics Canada says the Canadian economy grew by 0.6% in November, which is the sixth consecutive monthly expansion. The stats agency says its initial estimate for December suggests real GDP was essentially unchanged for the final month of last year, to bring growth to 4.9% for all of 2021. Royce Mendez at Desjardins says he expects the economy contracted in January under the weight of the Omicron variant of COVID-19. But he says the strong November reading means fourth quarter growth will likely surpass the Bank of Canada's forecast, leaving it on track to hike interest rates starting in March. The pandemic-delayed meeting between Canadian Indigenous leaders and Pope Francis is now set to take place the week of March 28th. The plan is for up to 30 Indigenous elders, residential school survivors, and youth to meet with the Pope and talk to him about reconciliation and healing. Indigenous delegates plan to share their expectations for a papal visit to Canada, and they wanted to come with an official apology for the Catholic Church's role in the residential school system. All parties in the House of Commons agree Canada must stand in solidarity with Ukraine as it faces Russia's military buildup along its border. But they're showing sharp divisions over how best to do that. In an emergency debate Monday night, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reiterated his government's commitment to expand and extend a military training mission in Ukraine, provide a $120 million loan, and other non-lethal aid. However, Conservative leader Erin O'Toole urged the government to provide lethal defensive weapons to Ukraine, while NDP leader Jagmeet Singh argued only diplomacy and sanctions will prevent escalation of the conflict. Last year's federal election costs have been tallied. Elections Canada says the vote cost $630 million. This is about $130 million more than the 2019 election, partly due to extra costs associated with the pandemic. The agency says it overestimated the number of people who would vote for mail-in ballot. As a result, it had trouble finding staff for polling stations and alternative voting venues. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole says MPs who want to oust him are confused about what direction they want to take the party. Mr. O'Toole is making it clear that he is going to fight. This comes as about one-third of his MPs are asking the party's caucus chair to hold a leadership review. His message to them was, quote, "It's time for a reckoning to settle this in caucus right here, right now, once and for all." That caucus meeting and a secret vote on Mr. O'Toole's leadership are set for Wednesday. Meanwhile, the president of the Saskatchewan Medical Association says Premier Scott Moe is wrong for saying COVID-19 vaccines are no longer helping prevent transmission of the virus. Dr. Eppen Stridham says a significant proportion of people who are triple vaccinated do not get ill from the virus even when they do get exposed, which means that they can't transmit it. Truckers and other protesters blocking a major U.S. border crossing in Alberta are starting to leave after the RCMP started an operation to enforce the law. Drivers at the Coots checkpoint began peeling off as police approached today. The RCMP say the protest started as peaceful, but it quickly turned into an unlawful blockade. The blockade started Saturday, along with other convoys across the country to protest COVID-19 measures. PEI Premier Dennis King has spoken to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau about resuming exports of island potatoes to the United States. The two men spoke yesterday about meetings in Washington between two federal cabinet ministers and the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. The PEI government issued a statement today saying the two levels of government are pledging to, quote, work together on restoring U.S. market access to PEI potatoes. The federal government unilaterally halted shipments in November after potato wart fungus was found on two island farms. Four First Nations, the City of Vancouver, and the resort municipality of Whistler have announced an Indigenous-led partnership. It is to explore a potential bid to host the 2030 Winter Olympics and Paralympics. Well, we have to keep an eye out for that. Up next, an interview kicking off Black History Month in Canada with Senator Rosemary Moody. Stay with us. Today marks the start of Black History Month, where Canadians remember and pay tribute to the many Black Canadians who made a difference in the country and around the world. This year's theme is called February and Forever, celebrating Black history today and every day. But as we enter our third year of the pandemic, we have learned more about the societal gaps that Black Canadians continue to face, from unemployment rates that are high to even higher COVID infection rates. Data from the Institute for Clinical Evaluative Sciences looked at the first 3 months of the pandemic in Ontario, and it indicates that people living in communities with the highest number of visible minorities or immigrants were 3 times more likely to test positive for COVID-19. Well, joining us now to give us her perspective on these disparities is Senator Rosemary Moody, chair of the African Canadian Senators Group and co-chair of the Parliamentary Black Caucus. Ma'am, welcome to Forum Daily.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me, Mina.
Thanks for joining us, ma'am. Now, looking at this research, it indicates that people of color in North America are more likely to be infected by COVID-19 because they're more exposed and less protected, and at the same time, more likely to die from COVID because of poor living conditions and poor food options. So how can we as a society tackle all of this?
So you're right. It's a really important question that you're raising here and an issue. We know that many of the communities that you describe are those essential workers. They're the frontline workers. They're the grocery store workers, the service industry, the maintenance service industry. And so these folks are out there and they have to be out there because they need the money, they need the work. And so they are in precarious jobs and sometimes paid less, and their lifestyles force them to have to turn up to work. Some of the interventions and the policy interventions that have happened recently will, I think, play an important part in helping solve the problem. One of them is paid sick leave, which I think is going to allow, if we can expand beyond the federal service, which the recent legislation restricted it to. It will help if it can spread at the provincial level and more broadly. I think also another big issue that we need to pay attention to is good housing, because right now crowded conditions are one of the biggest issues for families that are really unable to isolate as they possibly could, separate themselves off if one member of the family is ill. And so people are finding themselves often part of an outbreak in a home or in communities spreading really quite unrestricted. I think too that we need to look at more robust income support. If we can look at raising the minimum wage, making sure that the tax structure is more progressive and assists low-income Canadians. Those are the sorts of things, a living wage, are things that are important considerations for us moving forward. We need to be thinking about these things. And post-COVID, we really need to focus on our communities around education, encouraging them to take the vaccine, because frankly, there continues to be a large number of myths and misinformation that's circulating amongst our communities, and really standing as barriers for people getting immunized against COVID. So these are some of the important things. When I visited Taibu Community Health Center, there's some fantastic work being done by members of our community. I saw firsthand the incredible work that they were doing to increase vaccination rates in their community. We need more of that.
It's good that progress was made, ma'am. Now, just a minute left here, so let's end with what would you want this year to mean in terms of equality for all Black Canadians for the 2022 year?
What I'd like to see for Black people in Canada today is that we address the systemic disparities and the biases that affect and limit their ability to progress economically and to progress from a position of political power decision making. It is my hope that we will shift our political culture towards the consideration of Black Canadians as we move forward, and that we're able to see a more diverse society that works hard in an ongoing and quite deliberate way to ensure that there's diversity and inclusion in all aspects of our lives.
All right, Senator Moody, thank you again for joining us today for this Black History Month special.
Thank you.
All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back, and we'll be speaking with an organization that's fighting homelessness in Canada and their 25th annual Took Tuesday fundraising campaign. That and more news from around the world coming up next, so stay with us. Homelessness is a serious issue in Canada, with Statistics Canada saying over 235,000 people experience homelessness in a year. One national charity aims to improve the situation. So, Raising the Roof launched the Took Tuesday campaign, and today marks the 25th anniversary of that very campaign. Raising the Roof has been providing long-term solutions to homelessness in Canada for 25 years. So far, they have raised over $8 million for homelessness prevention programs across Canada. Their annual Toque campaign sees hundreds of volunteers and supporters selling toques across the country, with proceeds benefiting community agencies that work directly with those experiencing homelessness. Well, joining us now to discuss how Raising the Roof is addressing homelessness, as well as the challenges to improving the situation in Canada, is Mr. Mark Sovrano, Raising the Roof's Executive Director. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you so much for having me.
So can you give our viewers an idea of the current homelessness situation in Canada?
It's not great. There are 235,000 individuals that experience homelessness, as you mentioned, and housing prices are getting more and more expensive. Out of the G7 countries, there is no other one where the population growth and the amount of housing are as wide apart as they are in Canada. And there's really a lot of work to be done to both create more affordable housing for people to live in and also to prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place.
A lot of work to be done indeed, sir. Now, considering today we're marking Black History Month as well, what do we know so far about the proportion of minorities and Black Canadians that currently face homelessness?
You know, unfortunately, there's not a lot of data in general about the individuals that are experiencing homelessness in Canada. Definitely people from marginalized communities are experiencing it at a far more significant rate. As we're building housing, we're training and employing people experiencing homelessness. And about 90% of the people we're working with from the training end are Black Canadians. So if that's a representation of the overall kind of population, it's not a great start.
Indeed. And now there are a lot of misconceptions around those who fall into homelessness as well. So can you share with our viewers some of the key causes of homelessness in Canada, especially during this pandemic?
Yeah, there are really a lot of misconceptions, and more so than anything on Toque Tuesday, we're trying to bring awareness to the fact that this can happen to anyone. The response to COVID in Canada has been quick. And I think it's because we could all see ourselves as someone who might get COVID. And I wish that our approach to homelessness kind of had that same sort of tone. And I think connecting people more to the individuals experiencing this is really important. In general, 80% of individuals that are experiencing homelessness in Canada have seen some form of a family breakdown. So really, if we're thinking about prevention, one thing we have to do is keep families together, and creating affordable housing for families to do that. Keeping kids out of foster care is a huge way to work towards that.
All right, sir, just a minute and a half left here, but let's talk about Raising the Roof's initiative. So we talked about the Toque campaign launching today. Tell us about it and some other initiatives by Raising the Roof to improve this situation.
Yeah, so the two campaigns been going on for 25 years. We have 20 partner agencies across Canada, and when every toque is sold, it's for $15. Half the money goes to the local agency in that city, and half the money goes to Raising the Roof. And what we do with the money at Raising the Roof is we run a program called the Reside Program, where we're turning vacant properties across Canada into affordable housing and using the renovations as a way to train and employ people into construction jobs that are experiencing homelessness.
And what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that Raising the Roof is facing in its efforts to provide long-term solutions for homelessness?
Really, it's the funding available to build affordable housing. The government's doing a great job at finding more, but we're just getting started. The land is expensive, contracting is expensive, and it's just an expensive problem to solve. But the cost of supporting individuals that are experiencing homelessness is equally large, and I think there's a real business case to be made to invest in solutions rather than to be paying for the cost of the problem itself.
All right, Mr. Serrano, quick 30 seconds left here, but how can our Canadian viewers participate in these initiatives?
I mean, the two campaign is all about creating an easy way for Canadians to get involved. I would love for Canadians to purchase their Raising the Roof toque. You'd look great, I promise you. You can get them at raisingtheroof.org, and they're also available at every Home Depot across Canada in partnership with the Home Depot Foundation. So you can get them at Home Depot, you can get them online. It's a small way to contribute and to start the conversation.
All right, thank you, sir. We'll be right back after the break. The Omicron variant is still surging in Denmark, but the government is scrapping most pandemic restrictions. It says it no longer considers the COVID-19 outbreak as a socially critical disease. Face masks are no longer mandatory on public transportation, shops, and for standing clients in restaurant indoor areas. And a digital pass is no longer necessary to enter nightclubs, cafes, party buses, and to be seated indoors in restaurants. But the government warns that infections could rise in the coming weeks and that a fourth vaccination shot might be necessary. According to the Danish Health Authority, just over 80% of people in Denmark have 2 doses of COVID-19 vaccine, while about 60% have 3 doses. The World Health Organization says overuse of gloves and moon suits and the use of billions of masks and vaccination syringes to help prevent the spread of the coronavirus have led to a rise in healthcare waste worldwide. The UN Health Agency reports tens of thousands of tons of extra medical waste has strained waste management systems and is threatening both health and the environment. It points to a dire need to improve those systems via both governments and people. Protests and violence in Myanmar have marked the 1-year anniversary of the army's seizure of power in the Southeast Asian nation. Photos and video on social media Tuesday showed that a country-wide silent strike had emptied out streets in Myanmar's largest city of Yangon and other towns. This comes as people stayed home and businesses shut their doors in opposition to army rule. Clashes and violence were reported as well as the country faces an ongoing uprising against the military government that some UN experts now characterize as a civil war. Japanese lawmakers are urging their government to take action against a serious human rights situation in China. The parliamentary resolution on Tuesday drew a quick and angry rebuke from Beijing. It called the move extremely vile in nature and alleged Japanese lawmakers were interfering with China's internal affairs. The resolution passed by Japan's lower house stopped short of naming China, but it expressed concern about serious human rights conditions in Xinjiang, Tibet, Inner Mongolia, and Hong Kong, which are all regions of China. Iran has executed 2 gay men who were convicted on charges of sodomy and spent 6 years on death row. Homosexuality is illegal in Iran, which is considered one of the most repressive places in the world for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. The human rights activists' news agency reports the 2 men were hanged in a prison in the northwestern city of Maraga. Drought threatens millions of people in the Horn of Africa region. Somalia, Kenya, and now Ethiopia have raised the alarm about the latest climate shock. In Ethiopia's Somali region, people have seen the failures of what should have been 3 straight rainy seasons. And the death toll from landslides and flooding set off by heavy rains in Brazil's Sao Paulo state has reached 24 as firefighters continue pulling bodies from the mud. Brazil's most populous state was drenched with rain over the weekend. Hundreds of thousands of people were forced from their homes. The government of El Salvador has rejected a recommendation by the International Monetary Fund to drop Bitcoin as legal tender. El Salvador's Treasury Minister says Bitcoin is an issue of national sovereignty. The IMF has cited concerns about the volatility of Bitcoin prices and the possibility of criminals using the cryptocurrency. Tesla is recalling nearly 54,000 vehicles from the 2016 through 2022 model years. Certain Model S and Model 3 sedans and some years of both Model X and Y SUVs are being recalled. This is because their full self-driving software lets them roll through stop signs without coming to a complete halt. Tesla will disable the feature with an over-the-internet software update. The greatest quarterback in NFL history is retiring. 44-year-old Tom Brady has won 7 Super Bowls and set numerous passing records in his unprecedented 22-year career. He announced the decision this morning in a long post on Instagram. He wrote that he has loved his NFL career, but now it's time to focus his time and energy on other things that require his attention. The New York Times has bought the free and popular online word game called Wordle. It only listed the purchase price as being in the low 7 figures. Wordle was created by Josh Wardle, a Brooklyn software engineer, and on November 1st, only 90 people played the game on the website. Now, the Times says the simple puzzle that lets players guess a 5-letter word in 6 tries with no hints has millions of daily players. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.